Okay, it looks like we've got a good crowd here, over 50, almost 60 folks, and we'll get going with the webinar. Hopefully by now you've can see that I'm sharing a screen. If you don't see a screen being shared, stop me. But welcome everybody to the BEAD Benefit of the Bargain How to Apply webinar. We appreciate you guys getting up to speed with us as we've been getting up to speed over the last couple of weeks with the federal guidance that was put out on June 6th to remake the BEAD program and clarify certain things about the BEAD program with the Trump administration's new guidance to move forward under BEAD. As you guys know, we're in the middle of the first third, at least, of the 90-day sprint to get the final proposal submitted to NTIA with our updated award recommendations for their consideration in that final proposal document. So today we're going to go over what the requirements are and how the process changes to conduct this benefit of the bargain round. I'm going to go to the agenda slide next, but I want to say too kind of what our approach was on this benefit of the bargain round before we get too much further. And that was to make it as easy as possible for previous applicants to resubmit information that they previously developed over the last 6 months. That was kind of our North Star guiding point in redesigning this subgrantee selection process under the benefit of the bargain round. But at the same time, with the intent of the guidance, we're giving new folks the opportunity to come in. We're also giving the folks that previously applied but limited their application to certain geographies the opportunity to expand those proposals if they so choose. But again, we wanted to make sure that with how we redesigned this benefit of the bargain round, that it was easy as possible for the folks that previously submitted to reapply under this process we're going to go through in terms of the application window on your side over the next 30 to 45 days between this initial cycle and then the negotiation cycle of the benefit of the bargain round. There's a few items we've got on the agenda here. You can see we're going to go in the order of what the federal policy notice laid these changes out as. So I'll get into the first slide here in a second. There is one special announcement that's not on the agenda that we're going to go over in the last bit of this webinar. So please do stick around for that announcement that we're going to have at the end of the webinar about next steps in this application process. Okay, the first slide we're going to get into is regarding the elimination of regulatory requirements as outlined by the June 6th policy notice issued by NTIA. And you're going to hear me refer to that as the June 6th policy notice. I'm going to refer to our document that we published as the June 13th policy notice. So just for clarification, I'll try to remember to clarify between NTIA's June 6th and dhcd's June 13th, but when I use those dates to refer to different policy notices, that's what I mean. So in that June 6th policy notice by NTIA, there were several different categories that they have stricken from the original notice of funding opportunities. There are more than just these 4 bold categories on the screen that are in that federal policy notice, but these 4 bold categories are the ones that are relevant to you guys as the prospective subgrantees under the BEAD program. So what these are labor and employment and workforce development requirements, any requirements dealing with open access and net neutrality, any requirements regarding the middle class affordability plan, and any criteria around the low-cost service option requirement of BEAD. The 2 bits of context I'll give there, one is under the middle class affordability plan. Previously, the requirement of the middle class affordability plan in our previous subgrantee selection process was that any wireline provider would have to offer a free drop to a home or business within 1 year of service being made available to that home or business. That was so we were addressing the problem of folks not being able to get broadband connectivity in case they had an exorbitant special construction cost to bring broadband access down their driveway. That requirement still stands as a part of this benefit of the bargain round. We want to make sure that our wireline applicants are relevantly including the cost to build down folks' driveways, and that should be budgeted in to your request as it's still a requirement, even though the middle class affordability provisions are now struck out of the BEAD application process. The other thing I want to touch on is the low-cost service option. The federal guidance on June 6th says In summary, that states and territories may not explicitly or implicitly set any kind of low-cost service option price point. So when you're applying, you still need to tell us what your low-cost service option is, but the value or the price point that you set that low-cost service option at is entirely up to you as the applicant. Those are two key things to point out there. On the next slide, I want to get into what the experience is in terms of these narrative and attachment and certification requirements in the application portal. If you applied previously, you know that we get all those narrative requirements in the CAMS platform. Well, the CAMS platform still exists in its previous format. We did not go in and delete the narrative requirements, the attachments, the certifications that are now no longer relevant under the June 6th policy notice issued by NTIA. The reason that is because just software limitations of the CAMS platform. We can't go in and delete out questions once the first applicant has applied in any CAMS application process. So if you're a new applicant coming in, you should look at our June 13th policy notice, because in that June 13th policy notice, in the last section of it, there is an itemized list of all of the narrative sections, all of the attachments, all of the certifications that you don't need to do based on the June 6th policy notice issued by NTIA. So a little bit clunky, just wanted to address that head on, that there are questions, there are attachments, there are certifications that relate back to the previous BEAD requirements. You don't need to do those if you're a new applicant under this process. So just make sure you pay special attention to those itemized list of non-requirements in our June 13th policy notice that we put out, and that's currently on our webpage. And if you are a previous applicant and you want to edit your responses, you can do that. You should not try to roll back your CAMS application. You should just email us your new submissions or your corrected submissions if you so choose to submit those to the broadband email inbox. Okay, I'm going into the next category now of the federal policy notice. Again, we're going in the order of the federal policy notice and telling you guys about the guidance digest that we've done there. The technology neutrality section of the June 6th policy notice outlines that all broadband technologies that meet the performance requirements of IJA, Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and the Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO, must be eligible to participate in BEAD. So the priority broadband project definition has been newly established in this June 6th federal policy notice, and you can read that there. It's in the italicized text. I won't bore everybody by reading the definition of a priority broadband project, but it is there on the screen. It's also in our June 13th policy notice. It's in the federal June 6th policy notice. Well distributed out there. One of the key provisions of that technology neutrality section as well is that states are not permitted to categorically exclude any given technology. So just wanted to make sure that folks knew that was a requirement that NTIA has relayed to states in the June 6th, in their June 6th policy notice. Next up, we're getting into actually the application process here, the benefit of the bargain round. You can see here the schedule of this benefit of the bargain round. We've also outlined this on our website, on the BEAD webpage. Any dates with an asterisk next to them are currently tentative. That's because we don't know what the review process is going to be on our end. It depends on how many applications we get, how many new applications we get in particular. So we don't know yet on those dates with an asterisk next to them. I just want to put that out there and make that clear. That footnote is also available on our website, that those are to be confirmed dates with an asterisk next to them. After this, I'd like to get into the scoring criteria. So the scoring criteria at first is the primary criteria. Again, this goes back to the definition of what a priority broadband project is. Assuming there's two competing projects, the primary criteria we're going to evaluate those by is based on requested subsidy. So that you can see here the primary criteria that when we're deciding between competing applications covering the same general project area, we'll choose the option with the lowest cost based on minimal BEAD program outlay. That's similar with how we've done everything in the past. The body programs, the BEAD program, we're evaluating you based on requested funding per location. And this will be analyzed on a requested subsidy per location basis, as described in that June 6th policy notice. So there is a secondary scoring criteria as well that is laid out by the June 6th policy notice put out by NTIA. These secondary criteria only become relevant if the competing proposal to the cheapest proposal is within 15% of the cheapest proposal that we receive as a broadband office. So we've established the weighting to those secondary criteria. These categories are prescribed to us in the policy notice issued by NTIA. We had the capability of selecting the points consideration that we gave to each one of these criteria. So the three are the speed to deployment, how quickly the network can be deployed and serving these locations, the speed of the network and other technical capabilities, and then also whether or not an applicant was previously selected as a provisional sub-grantee in that application area. To break those down into a little bit more detail, the speed to deployment, you guys that applied previously are familiar that you got full credit if you were committing to build the network in less than 36 months. That general intent still stays the same, that you get 25 points here, 25 out of 100 total in this secondary scoring criteria category if you commit to building the network in less than 3 years. If you commit to doing that in this application and you end up winning, we're going to hold you to that in the contract. You can see there's a sliding scale on the left bottom hand corner where you get less points for the longer it takes for you to build out the network that you're proposing to do under the application process. In the middle there, the speed of the network and other technical capabilities. I don't have the exact grading rubric we're doing here, but functionally what you guys should know is that the higher the download speeds that you're planning to offer, up to a gig download speeds, that would give you up to 15 available points in this category. The higher upload speeds, up to a gig upload, would get you up to 10 points in this category. And the exact scaling and scoring is available on our policy notice online. The last thing is pretty self-explanatory as well. If you were identified as a previously provisionally selected subgrantee, then you'll receive 50 points out of this 100-point scoring criteria. That scoring criteria will only that scoring criteria only applies for the zip code portal application round. That's because we confidentially notified folks previously if they were awarded or not at the zip code or the ZICTA level. We never provisionally notified anybody of awards under the negotiation cycle. So we're not going to consider whether or not a company was identified as a provisionally selected subgrantee under the negotiation cycle when it comes to figuring out if we're going to grant you 50 points or not when we're down to the negotiation cycle, the benefit of the bargain round. Just those two former scoring criteria will apply under the negotiation cycle. Okay, the next category we want to get into, going in the order of the federal policy notice, is optimizing BEAD locations. There's three key things here that folks ought to know when it comes to the locations under our BEAD process, eligible locations. The first is that we are required, states and territories are required to consider and remove locations that do not require BEAD funding. Thankfully, we were already a couple steps ahead on this one with our BEAD application process. As you guys remember, back in January and February, we conducted what was called the deobligation process, which was based on a set of criteria outlined in the final proposal guidance version 1.2 that allowed us to identify locations that require BEAD funding, whether it was a barn or a rock or a chicken house or a fake square-shaped polygon that looked like a rooftop, or if it already had broadband access. So for the new applicants, we went through a pretty extensive process to already identify these locations. We're going to lean on that list when it comes to fulfilling the requirement as outlined by NTIA to take out locations that do not require BEAD funding. So for the new applicants, if this is also outlined in the policy notice that we put out on June 13th, but you should be going to the Open Data Portal. You should be downloading the two lists of locations under the BEAD application areas file. You should also be downloading the recommended BEAD deobligation locations, comparing those against each other. If you take the BEAD application areas minus the recommended deobligation points, that gives you what we think are legitimate BEAD eligible locations. And again, with the priority of making this as easy as possible for folks to reapply, we're sticking with that structure of you, the applicant, submitting the deobligation points that signifies what you're working to take off the map. There was a lot of confusion about if we've already updated those locations on the recommended deobligation list. We have. So everything on the Open Data Portal is what you guys need to know when it comes to this first bullet on this slide. The only change we made to the recommended deobligation list was that we looked at the fabric between version 5 and version 6, and about 1,000 locations that were previously BEAD eligible were removed from the fabric between version 5 and version 6 of the fabric. Those locations, about 1,000 of them, are now added to our deobligation list for you guys to factor into your applications. The next thing I want to point out is state broadband offices must factor in locations that are served by unlicensed fixed wireless providers. The June 6th policy notice outlined a dual 7-day process, 7 days for unlicensed fixed wireless providers to notify us of their intent to submit a challenge, and then 7 days for those unlicensed fixed wireless providers to submit the data that substantiates that challenge. We've gone through the initial 7-day window. We are currently in the second 7-day window for one unlicensed fixed wireless provider that did notify us of their intent to submit documentation that they serve BEAD eligible locations at the speeds outlined in the June 6th policy notice. That 7-day deadline for that particular unlicensed fixed wireless provider closes tomorrow. So we've got to have some time to issue a determination there, look at the supporting data, and then we'll issue notice if any BEAD eligible location changes are going to be made beyond that. There's one technicality here that in order to make sure that when we're moving forward with this, that we're not asking you guys to do needless work on locations that may change, it's that if an unlicensed fixed wireless provider does submit locations and backs up that they do serve those locations with the required data requirements, then all the locations in that zip code tabulation area will then fall through to the negotiation cycle, at least the ones that they haven't documented that they can actually serve. So in order to do that, that's just to have a clean process, a clean break between this zip code tabulation area cycle and then the initial cycle, as we call it, and then also the negotiation cycle. So just wanted to say that's how we're navigating this with the active unlicensed fixed wireless determination process going on currently. The last thing that we'll touch on here, community anchor institutions, CAIs. Federal guidance issued on June 6th reestablishes the definition of what a CAI is to put that into operation for our folks. All CAIs, as we've determined in our June 13th guidance, are now optional for applicants to include or not include in their applications. So completely up to you guys as the applicants and whether or not you choose to include those. I'm going to go to the next slide here. And Pamela, I do see your question. I'm going to get to that in 2 slides. Erica, I do see the comment there as well about the new definition is straight from legislation. Great point. The new definition of the priority broadband project is straight from legislation. So thanks for clarifying that. Okay, this gets into a lengthy list of other provisions and clarifications. This full list of other provisions and clarifications is outlined in our June 13th policy notice. You should go check that out. I'm pulling out the critical ones here that I think folks really need to be aware of as you guys are going into this next phase of the application process. The first is that if you previously applied and you don't have any major changes to your applications, then you don't need to resubmit all of the narratives and certifications and attachments in the CAMS portal. If there are major changes or you do want to resubmit those materials, you should email those to us. Don't try to roll back your CAMS application. Don't try to go back in CAMS and edit that thing. Just email us the files that you want to replace and give us some details about what we should disregard in the CAMS application. email it to the broadband email inbox. The other thing is that previously under the former round, we had a kind of a two-phased process where it was a priority broadband project considered and a non-priority broadband project considered. For the purpose of this application cycle and the benefit of the bargain round, we'll only consider applications that meet the definition of a priority broadband project under the initial cycle of the benefit of the bargain round. Next up, I've got it highlighted because I've got more details in the following slide, is that the 95% of location requirement still remains in effect. We got some questions from folks about, well, doesn't the June 6th policy notice allow applicants to take out extremely high cost locations from their project areas? You're right. It's a good question. We believe this 95% requirement meets the intent of that June 6th guidance that was outlined by NTIA, that applicants are allowed to remove high cost locations from those zip codes because you've got the 5% of wiggle room there. You've actually got even more flexibility than that I'm going to outline on the next slide, with community anchor institutions being optional. The last thing I'll highlight here is that we are going to require folks to utilize that deobligation list. If you don't provide that deobligation list, we're going to assume that you're leaning on it. So if you have any questions there, feel free to email us, but we are going to push folks pretty heavily to that deobligation list. Formerly, it was optional. This time, you better have a darn good reason for not following that. There are certain rules that we must go by when it comes to the June 6th policy notice that deal with specific reason codes on that deobligation list. So we're going to assume that you're going by it. If you're not going by it, send us an email really quick so we can hop on a call and try to better understand why you disagree or agree with the locations outlined in that deobligation cycle list. Okay, this is another round of questions that we've gotten so far regarding this 95% rule. So in the guidance, you guys have seen that when it comes to 95%, we are calculating that 95% based on the number of unserved and underserved locations in a zip code tabulation area. That's because community anchor institutions are now optional. So this is what the formula looks like on our side when we're calculating if you're meeting the 95% requirement or not. We've got a couple of real world examples after this. So the amount of unserved, underserved, and eligible community anchor institutions that you include in your proposal divided by the number of unserved and underserved locations entirely in the zip code tabulation area determines whether or not you meet the 95% requirement. Previously, it was the unserved, underserved, and CAIs in the application divided by unserved, underserved, and CAIs in the application. But now, since CAIs are optional entirely, it's just underserved and unserved in the zip code that we're dividing by. So you got to get to 95%. If it's greater than or equal to 95%, that's a valid application. If it's less than 95%, that's an invalid application. And as we've clarified, in addition to our other provisions and guidance, and I'm going to talk about this later on, we previously outlined a lot of curing procedures in the process that we would go back and forth if you were missing data, if you had data that was incomplete. Unfortunately, we're not able to continue to offer that based on the 90-day fast track to get these proposals resubmitted to NTIA. So if we have time, we're going to consistently offer curing across all applicants to make sure that you're submitting qualifying proposals that meet the 95% requirement. But if time is not available, then we're not going to be able to offer that curing opportunity. So it'll either be offered to everybody or nobody. So just keep that in mind as you guys are submitting proposals. If you want to run something by us ahead of time, you're welcome to do that. We'll get to those as quick as we can, but any kind of stuff you want to run by us ought to come to the broadband email inbox. So I digressed a little bit there from the 95% requirement. Here's a couple of real world examples. So if there are, just in a theoretical zip code, ZICTA, if there are 80 unserved locations, 10 underserved locations, and 10 eligible community anchors. Here are two examples. The first ISPA includes 75 unserved, 2 underserved, and 8 eligible CAIs. That's a total of 85 locations. So 85 divided by 90, because we're dividing by 90 because 90 is the sum of the unserved and underserved locations. 85 divided by 90 is not 95%. ISPA has an invalid application. ISPB include 66 unserved, 10 underserved, and 10 community anchors for a total of 86 locations. 86 divided by 90 is over 95%. That's a valid proposal. If there are any more questions there, reach out to the broadband email inbox. So rounding the corner, heading for home here, this is the last slide about the other provisions and application clarifications. The first one is the bullet I just talked about, is that we're going to make every effort to come back to you guys and give you a chance to submit corrected information. That goes for the zip code portal when it comes to meeting the 95% requirement, if we can, if we have time. That also goes for the narrative applications that you're submitting in the CAM system and the attachments and the narratives and certifications. We're going to make every we possibly can to come back to you guys in the time that we have to review applications to offer the chance to correct those. It's going to be really tight turnarounds if we do have the time to do that. But we're not going to commit to that under this process. The other thing is that, as I mentioned previously as well, you guys ought to refer back to our June 13th policy notice when it comes to a comprehensive list of applications, certification, narratives that are now stricken out by the federal guidance put out on June 6th that we've had digested through our June 13th release. And the last thing is that the requirement that awardees are going to be prohibited from special construction costs for a minimum of 12 months after broadband service is made available, that still stands. That's the middle class affordability thing I was talking about earlier. Middle class affordability is no longer a thing under the June 6th guidance, but that requirement about special construction costs for 12 months after service is made available still applies for the wireline providers. Okay, I see a couple of questions came in, so I'll address those now. Robert at ESVBA says, is there any way to get confirmation from the broadband mailbox to verify receipt of messages? Robert, we get that question a lot. Apologize for not previously providing confirmation of receipt. We'll work on that. If you ever have any questions, you can email us, one of us personally, to see if we've gotten that message. But you should still definitely send your questions to the broadband email inbox for consistency and for us to update FAQs and that sort of thing. Pamela, I'm going back way up to the first one of the questions now. If the deobligation removal now causes the locations to fall below the 95% requirement, how are you planning to score and consider this? So the deobligations do not factor into this 95% requirement. When you guys are applying, like you did in the last time, even if a location point is deobligated, you still include that location ID in the zip code portal. So when you're calculating your 95%, it's total location IDs included in the zip code portal versus total unserved and underserved location IDs in that zip code. The deobligations don't play a role there. I'm reading Riley's question now. So Riley's asking for clarification about changes we've made to the data sets. If you go to the BEAD application areas data set, that's the original 133,000 or so locations between the unserved and underserved and eligible CAIs. That's the same exact list of locations, same exact set of location IDs. What's changed and how we're in compliance with the June 6th policy notice is that we ran another update to our deobligation list. Previously, that list, I couldn't tell you how many locations were on it previously, but we added about 1,000 locations to that recommended deobligation list because those locations fell off the fabric between version 5 and version 6. So to develop a coherent proposal in terms of costing out how much it's actually going to be to get to these locations in the zip code, what you need to do is download again that original list of 133,000 or just pull it back up on your computer from 3 months ago. Download the new list of deobligations and then factor in which locations are fake in this deobligation list when you're designing your proposal and costing out how much it's actually going to take to get to the real locations in those project areas. Rodney did ask if you can post those lists in the FAQ. Brandon, I see you're already on that. Appreciate you doing that. If somebody from the Office of Broadband team could post the recommended deobligation file from the Virginia Open Data Portal, or the link to that, that'd be really helpful as well. They're also linked in the guidance on our June 13th guidance. So Pamela asks, if we already submitted CAMS materials, what uploads are required for this one? Proof of funding, budgets for each. So Pamela, if you guys are not substantially changing any of your applications from the previous round, and all you're doing is reapplying with generally the same locations, generally the same funding request, and you're not substantially changing your application, you don't need to go back and upload and update anything in CAMS. If you're applying for new areas, you need to fulfill the requirements in those new areas you're applying for. If you're changing the proposed technology type of your previous proposal, then you need to go back in and update the materials. But in general, if you're not substantially changing your previous proposal, then you don't need to go back into CAMS and update anything. The last thing I'll point out too is that just as a follow up to Brandon's second to last point there, is that there was one small change made to the application area polygons. So if you guys have been using the polygons that are on the BEAD application area file, we did fix a zip code boundary that was previously incorrect between Montgomery, Pulaski, and the city of Radford. That's way far down in the weeds, but if you need to know it, now you know it. So another clarification question: if we're changing the funding request, then that requires both a new budget and proof of funding templates and upload to CAMS or email to the Office of Broadband. So if you're going to update your budget or proof of funding, then you should email those to us at the broadband email inbox. That's specific advice to you guys as a former applicant of the process, but you should email us those documents to the broadband email inbox if you're going to submit those couple of new things. Joe is asking, can we clarify when the unlicensed fixed wireless locations that provide sufficient evidence will be removed from the BEAD eligible list? It sounded like they won't be updated until after the broadband office or benefit of the bargain round closes. So, Joe, the deadline for that one unlicensed fixed wireless challenger to submit data that substantiates their service claims is tomorrow night, 11:59 p.m. We would then move as quickly as we can with consideration of the data to thoroughly evaluate it, to issue a determination there. And if we issue a determination that some of those locations are served by that unlicensed fixed wireless technology, then every location in those zip codes or ZICTAs falls through to the negotiation cycle. We'll take the ones out that are served by unlicensed fixed wireless technology, and then the ones that are left will just roll into the negotiation cycle. So if you're coming into the zip code round, you should be applying to the zip code round as if the locations that are posted now are the locations that we're going to run with. If the unlicensed fixed wireless challenge comes through and is substantiated, then the risk you've taken is that that however many zip codes that you previously applied for fall through to the negotiation cycle. We've taken out the locations that are served by unlicensed fixed wireless, and then you're applying for the locations on the negotiation cycle. All right, let's briefly hit on the next slide here. So we're in the bottom of the ninth inning, and we've got a rain delay. This is not in the guidance that we put out on June 13th because it's not relevant to the subgrantee selection process, but it is relevant for state broadband offices. The June 6th guidance put out by NTIA requires states to submit what's called an initial proposal correction letter. That initial proposal correction letter outlines that we're going to adopt the new set of guidance, modify our subgrantee selection process, do a lot of other things that we committed to in our June 13th policy notice. We submitted this initial proposal correction letter to NTIA on June 18th, this time last week. And as of the start of this webinar, we have not received approval yet from NTIA on this one-page initial proposal correction letter. So without that approval, as clarified in their FAQs, they've put out version 9 of their FAQs, we're not permitted to start our subgrantee selection process. They use the term execute in their policy notice on June 6th, but they clarify that, meaning opening the application window in their FAQ document. So when we do get that notification that our initial proposal correction template or initial proposal correction letter has been approved by NTIA, you guys will get the application links to apply in the zip code portal. That's why you haven't gotten them yet, because we have not received this. We have not received approval of our initial proposal correction from NTIA at this time. So once we do receive approval of that initial proposal correction from NTIA, that's when you'll get the link to access the ZICTA portal in your inboxes. We don't know if that's going to be tomorrow. We don't know if it's going to be next week. We don't have an indication or an approval timeline from NTIA when it comes to letting us move forward with our subgrantee selection process, with them approving that initial proposal correction letter. So our intent on that, and this gets into the last bullet, our intent, we fully want to be able to give you guys 7 calendar days to submit, as we lined out in our June 13th guidance, submit your proposals under this ZICTA round, under this initial cycle of the benefit of the bargain round. We're going to continue to push to continue to do that. There's a bit of slack in this 90-day accelerated timeline to get this final proposal back to NTIA for their review and consideration. But ultimately, how much time we allow for this zip code tabulation area round, this initial cycle, is going to depend on when we get that approval from NTIA to move forward with the subgrantee selection process. So I know that's tough news. I know a lot of folks had lined up internal resources to start applying as soon as those application links came out. We apologize for the inconvenience here. We'll get those to you as soon as we can once we get NTIA's approval of our initial proposal correction letter. You'll see a public release come out on that later today from our office, notifying our stakeholders broadly that we're delaying the opening of our initial cycle of the benefit of the bargain round because we have not yet received this approval from NTIA on that initial proposal correction letter. So with that, we'll open it up for Q&A, and I'm going to try to rewind into the chat here on questions that I stopped to get to that next slide. This is also the time that some folks start dropping off. So before I get into the questions in the chat, are there any questions on that last slide I just covered? Feel free to come off mute and ask them directly. Okay. Let's see where I left off in the chat.
Hey, Chandler, quick question.
Yeah, hang on.
Does that mean that if they don't approve that there's potential future changes?
I can't speak to NTIA, so I'm not
Okay.
not going to weigh in there. But yeah, I can't speculate because we haven't received any input about expected approval timelines.
Okay, yeah, just curious, honestly. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. All right, Roy is asking a good lawyer question. I picked on Roy a lot in the first subgrantee selection process round, and Roy's asking if we can talk about, can we address more about what it means to substantially change your previous application? Is there a threshold that the broadband office has in mind? It could be a significant amount of work to update multiple CAMS applications by email. So Roy, just in general government grants world, the mulligan you could say is that generally if the budget adjustment is within 10% of the original, then that would not require a substantial change in the process. I'll need to take that back to the team to see if we need to attach a allowable percentage change to it without having to go back and completely overhaul all the CAMS applications. But my initial gut reaction there is that we would take that 10% number and apply it to this and say that if you're changing your request more than 10% either direction, then we would want to see you resubmit the technical capability requirements in CAMS to justify that change in request.
Got it. Thanks. Chandler, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
Yeah. This is Roy. Another thing to possibly consider with previous applicants is maybe they could make that adjustment if they're provisionally awarded, like maybe do it in short order. That way, you're not getting a whole ton of updates of previous applications that that don't end up winning, and you only get the updates for the ones that you need. It's just something to consider. Did that make sense?
Could you say that first part again? I buffered on my side. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. So what you had just said you're thinking we're going to take back is if a change of an application of like the overall, I guess, grant requests or is 10% or greater, then update it now with your application. Perhaps consider what I'm suggesting is perhaps consider only making the previous applicant updated if it actually is provisionally awarded. There could be a little bit of time there to do it. That'll save folks perhaps save some effort because we only have 5 business days to get going once this portal opens. So anyway, just something for you to consider.
That is a good idea. Let me take that back to the team. But yeah, I appreciate the thought there. We'll definitely take that one back.
Thank you.
And if we do adopt that, it would be published in an FAQ in the next couple of days.
Understood. Thank you.
Chandler, where's the FAQ going to be hosted? Is it going to be on the website? And if so,
Yeah.
under what page?
It's the same one as before. So if you look under BEAD application documents and resources, I think it is. It's the
Just
same
a continuation
FAQ.
of the same one.
Yeah, just
Okay.
a continuation of the same one.
All right.
And then Brandon Herndon in the chat. Brandon, this is a great reminder. Should have included this as a point in our PowerPoint deck, is that folks, if you didn't submit a reserve proposal to your bundled zip codes or ZICTA proposals in the past, you really ought to be doing that. We hammered this in the first time. Everybody's gotten the chance to resubmit now. So if you are going to submit bundled proposals in the zip code round, then you really ought to submit reserves to those ZICTAs. Would heavily recommend that you do that. Joe Puckett asks if we're aware of any state that has gotten approval of their initial proposal correction letter. I am not aware of any such state that has gotten the approval. I do know we were the 4th state in the queue when we submitted that letter to them. Hopefully that means we're close to the front of the line.
This is Roy Littleton of Verizon again. Question about CAIs. We hadn't appreciated that that for the 95% they would be included in the numerator but not the denominator. Related question for the scoring, the primary scoring for subsidy per location, are CAIs included there at all?
When we calculate the subsidy, we're going to be doing request divided by location IDs included in your proposal.
So, but are CAIs included as a location ID, or is that just the BSL?
Yes. Yeah. Because that would be in the zip code portal field where you would type in the location IDs that you're including in the proposal. So the CAIs would still count to when we're calculating requested subsidy per location and comparing you guys against other applicants.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We got a question about when you guys are actually going to get access to the portal to see the actual applications and be able to start working on it. You guys will get that link once we get approval from NTIA of our initial proposal correction letter.
Hey, Chandler.
That sounds
Here.
like Tamara.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who did not participate in our initial cycle, our original application guidelines are still on our website, right? So
Yeah.
what's in CAMS is actually in a PDF on our website. So you might, even though you may not have access to the CAMS portal or any portal at this point, for the narrative section, you can look in our application guidelines, and to Chandler's point earlier, ignore anything that has been removed due to regulatory requirements. And so reference our June 13th document with our original application guidance. And so that can give you a heads up to what some of the questions are in CAMS and the requirements. In the meantime, because we're not allowed to open the portal, as Chandler stated earlier.
Yeah.
So you can't access it at all at this point.
One thing you could do in the intermission here is, if you're a new applicant, you could go ahead and apply for a CAMS profile, especially if you didn't come in the first round, you don't have any experience or history working with DHCD. Go ahead and apply for a CAMS profile. That is available. The how-to of that is available through what's called the CAMS user guide. If you need that, feel free to email us at the broadband email inbox. Joe asked in the chat, when it comes to considerations of priority broadband projects, Joe, we outlined some application requirements when it came to new requirements in letter of intent, and we're looking at those now in terms of responses about whether folks have justified appropriately that they meet definitions of priority broadband. Last call for questions. Okay, well, you guys will see one thing in the next few minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. We'll send out that notice that officially notifies folks that we are under a delay to get started in our subgrantee selection process. Once we do get approval from NTIA of that initial proposal correction letter, then you guys will receive your unique ID link, unique application ID link to access the zip code portal. We'll also communicate the link that portal is going to be open when we send you that application link when the goal, with the goal of it being 7 calendar days like it currently is now, that you guys have the ability to apply in. So thanks for hanging with us, and we'll be in touch. Appreciate everybody, and reach out to the broadband email inbox if you have any questions.
Hey, Chandler, one last thing. When do you think you'll know whether or not, if we're going to be changing our applications, if we have to resubmit the, funding source tables, costs, timelines, perform all that stuff, or are you guys going to wait till the award is done? How many days do you think it might take before you get back to us on that?
My personal goal would be end of the week to get that FAQ up, to answer Roy's question, and then talk about the allowable deviation that would trigger the need to resubmit.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.